Happy coding.
Hey there, this is Kevin here, and welcome to the next video in our series of Intro to Web Development. In this video, we're going to talk through a library called Bootstrap, which is one of the most famous libraries, maybe of all time. um, and it lets you sort of create a, like, I don't know, real looking website without writing a ton of the CSS or JavaScript yourself. So before I talk through Bootstrap, I want to talk through a couple things that are mostly review. So um, you recently learned about libraries. So that's the idea of importing some code that you did not write into your project and loading it in your HTML and then being able to use that code. So, for example, we looked at a library called Sweet Alert, which when you load it in your page like this, you can then call a function that that library offers. And then we also looked at a library called p5.js, which offers like even more functions that lets you like draw shapes and create animations, all that good stuff. The other thing that we talked about previously was CSS, which hopefully by now you are pretty familiar with. And that is the idea of writing, well, CSS code that styles your HTML. So you use like selectors and you set like classes on your elements, and then you style those classes over in your CSS. So Bootstrap uses both of those ideas and sort of smushes them together to give you a sort of, I don't know, reasonable like starting point for your styles and your project. So I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute, but just to get something started, I'm going to start with maybe a smaller example. So I am over here in the glitch editor. I haven't actually written any code yet. Hopefully by now you are not surprised that this is how I start pretty much every lecture. But what I want to do is like start building out a web page like I would, you know, pretty much every time I do it, right? Which is by writing HTML and then writing CSS. So I don't have a great example in my brain, but let's say that I wanted to add, I don't know, like a little card or something, like a little section of my page that has like maybe a border and maybe a button or something. So I could do that, right? I could maybe have like a div, and I'm going to give that div a class. Maybe I'll call it like card. So div class equals card. And I can have other divs inside of this div. So maybe I'll have a div and I'll give this a class of, I don't know, like card dash body. And then in here, maybe I have like, I don't know, like an H1 that says something like, I don't know, my card. And maybe I'll give this H1 a class and I'll call this like card heading, or maybe card header. And then maybe I'll have like a p tag in here, and I'll give this a class, and I'll call this like, I don't know, card text. And I need some text in there, like click this button. And you can imagine that maybe this is like, I don't know, an advertisement for like a particular section of the web page I want to show. And maybe I'll have a button or a link or something, but I'll start with a button that says go. And I'll give this a class of, I don't know, like button and maybe button primary. Maybe I'll give it a couple classes. So far all I've done is write some HTML, and maybe I'll click this prettier button just to fix the indentation and whatnot. But I've got a div and another div inside of that. I've got an H1 and a p tag and a button. And then all of those things have classes, which I can then style in my CSS. So let's see. So I already am loading my CSS here. So let's do that. So if I go to like, I don't know, if I style the card itself, so like dot card and curly braces, then I can give it like a border of thin, solid, and black. And okay, so I've got my border going, and maybe I want my, what did I call that, card header? Maybe I want that to have like a border bottom. of thin solid black, and yeah, so I'm kind of styling it to look like a card, like a thing that I would have sort of in the middle of my page. I could also do things like have, I don't know, like a container div here. So div class equals container. And, I could add more styles to that whole thing. And maybe I could like center it and like set its size so that my page doesn't fill up my whole width. And maybe, let's see, so maybe I'll also style my button. So dot button, and maybe I'll give that like a bigger font size, so like font size 18 pixels, and sure, it's a little bigger. Maybe I'll make it even bigger, and I can keep up this process. And by now, you have gone through this process yourself many times, where you are looking at your content and you're looking at your CSS and you're kind of going back and forth, and you are changing the styles to get it closer and closer to what you want it to look like. And depending on how you feel, that might be fun, actually, or it might be tedious. But either way, I think there is sort of a challenge to get your web page to look like, fill in the blank, like real or like professional. I'm putting those in quotation marks because they are like pretty subjective, but at least for me, I know that when I fiddle with CSS, like there's something intangible that I'm like, I just want it to look like a real website, not something I cobbled together, even though every web page is cobbled together. And that's the challenge here with what we're doing, where we're going back and forth and trying to come up with the like exactly correct set of styles to make our content look, professional or whatever. And wouldn't it be nice if someone did that for us? And spoiler alert, they did. It's called Bootstrap. So remember how with libraries, you import a library into your code, into your HTML, and then you can use stuff from it. What we've seen so far is using JavaScript functions, but a library can also be a CSS file. And in Bootstrap's case, it's actually both. It's a CSS file and a JavaScript file. So I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to get rid of all of this. These are just my styles that I put in here just to test things out. I'm going to delete them. So we're going back to like regular sort of default styles here. And my HTML is still the same, where I have these classes and some elements that are currently unstyled. So let me go steal these two lines of code, and I'll explain them in a second. But for now, let me just paste them in and sort of show you what happens. So all I'm doing is I'm pasting in two lines of code, one that loads a CSS file, exactly how we've loaded CSS files before, and one that loads a JavaScript file, exactly how we've loaded JavaScript files. The only difference is that these files are coming from Bootstrap. I didn't create them. Bootstrap did, or the team behind Bootstrap, the human beings behind Bootstrap. So anyway, enough preamble. Let me just paste this in, and there you go. You see that the card here has some styling, and it's got like this rounded border, and it's got like this blue button with some styling. And I think I actually messed something up in my divs. Let's see, div, card body. I did mess something up, but like this gap shouldn't be there, but that's all right. I'll fix it in a second, and I'll show you how. But the point is that by adding those two lines of code, what I got was a set of styles that style these classes that I've been using. And so I didn't have to do any of that. I didn't have to like think like exactly like what kind of border do I want here? Like, should it be round or not? Like, what color should my button be? I didn't really do anything. Like my CSS is still empty actually. But because I am loading two things, first I'm loading, let me prettify this a little bit. Sure. First, I'm loading a CSS file. This is like a big, like long URL, but in the end, it's just a .css file. And I'm loading a JavaScript file. It's a big, ugly URL, but in the end, it is just a JavaScript file. So I can go here actually in my browser if I really want to check it out. And it's going to be kind of gross because it's going to be minified, which means like all the spaces and like new lines have been removed. But let's see if I can just kind of get rid of that .min in the URL and hope for the best. And yeah, there we go. So here is the Bootstrap CSS file. It's thousands and thousands of lines of CSS code, but it's doing things like, selecting a class and adding some styles to it. And the power here is this is a reasonable set of defaults that make your page look pretty nice, as long as you are using the like corresponding classes. So let me just do a Control F for card. And yeah, here we go. Here's the sort of styling, the style rules that they are applying to the card class, which is what I'm using. It's kicking in flexbox, it's giving it like a height and whatnot. It's giving it a background color, a border radius, all that stuff. And then this is saying like for things that are inside of the card, how would that be styled? And it's just CSS, but the power is that I didn't have to write any of this. I just imported it into my file and I can use it. So that is the bulk of Bootstrap. I'll talk more about like how to find classes and whatnot, but really it's just a CSS file. The other thing that it is though is a JavaScript file. So I'm loading this JavaScript, and right now my example doesn't really use any of that JavaScript, so I could probably get rid of this line and nothing bad would happen. But Bootstrap also adds like functionality or interactivity to certain classes. So to show what I mean, I'm going to just start a new project, I think. And I'm just going to remix our same project that we've been using this whole time, and wait for Glitch to wake up. You can, now that we've learned about P5, you probably can guess at like some of the techniques they might be using for that little animation over there, but it's beside the point. Anyway, I'm going to steal a little example from myself over here, and I'm going to just take some code. Where is that? Here. So this, actually, maybe I'll just steal this stuff inside of body. Okay. Sure. And then prettify it. So this is just HTML. It has some divs. It's got some elements. I've got like a button, the buttons and like the ULs and LIs, like they have classes, but I haven't actually done anything with them. So they're just default. So I've got this button here. It doesn't actually do anything if I click it, but it's got like the default stylings. And then I've got like this LI, this UL with LIs, and they are links, but they don't really link to anything. It's just like dot is the current page. But it's a list of links, and you could imagine that I could write CSS that styles this. And let's say that actually what I wanted was I wanted to sort of turn this into a drop down where I click the button and then the drop down sort of appears, and then I can click one of the links. So I could do that, right? I could write that HTML, I could write that CSS, I could write that JavaScript, and you can probably kind of guess at how I would do that. I would add some, stylings to these classes. Maybe I would hide them by default by giving them like display of none or something. And then when I clicked the button, I would trigger JavaScript that changed the display away from none to, block or something to make it visible. And we've seen some of that in other lectures. And I could do that. I could write all of that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. However, what if I didn't have to? And spoiler alert, I think by now you can probably guess that this is, again, the power of Bootstrap. Because I have used like a magic set of classes here, as soon as I load Bootstrap, and I'm going to steal that line of code here. So as soon as I add the 2 lines of code that load the CSS and the JavaScript from Bootstrap, this will work. So let me paste that in. And now over here, I've got my button, which is still just a button. It's still the same HTML. And now you see that like my list is not visible by default, but if I click here, then indeed I do see my list, and it's like nicely formatted. It's got like this like round border, that there's like when I hover over, there's some styling that sort of indicates what I'm clicking on, and it just kind of looks, nice. And again, I could have done that, right? You could do that, but it would take, an hour to code that up, whereas this one took me 5 seconds. So that is, again, like the power of Bootstrap, the magic of Bootstrap. And from here, it's in giant quotation marks, just a matter of figuring out what magical classes do you have to use. Like, how did I know to use like container here? How did I know to use class equals dropdown, or like class equals btn or btn dash primary? How did I know that? And I have sort of said many times now that my goal with this class or with these videos is not to teach you web development. Like, shockingly enough, that's not my end goal. My goal is to teach you how to teach yourself web development, because that's the secret. That's how every web developer is just learning as they go. So I do not expect you, I don't encourage you to try to memorize a bunch of classes and like know exactly when to use them, because no one does that. Instead, I encourage you to look at the documentation. So if I go to Bootstrap's website, and I'm just going to straight up DuckDuckGo it, Bootstrap, and sure enough, here's the first link here, getbootstrap.com. That's their official like web page. So if I click that, this is just their homepage, and you can get like some getting started things, and like here's the 2 lines of code that I added. They have some extra stuff that we don't really care about, but this is basically the same thing that we just did. But I'm going to go up here. I'm going to click Docs. And then so first off, this page is like a getting started guide that tells you like, here's the 2 lines of code you need to add. Here's some different ways you could do it. But really, the important part on this page is this left nav here, especially when we get under like layout, content, forms, like components. Here's all of the different things that you can do using Bootstrap, and you can click any of them. So actually, I'm kind of annoyed with myself that I messed up the card example from earlier. So I'm going to kind of look at that one as my example. So if I didn't know ahead of time, like, hey, what classes do I need if I want to create that sort of like card element? Well, I would click on this, go to card. I would read through this page and look at their examples. So here is, here's an example card, and sure, looks great. And then here's some example code. So div class equals card dash body, card title, card text, and yeah, let me see if I can figure out what I did wrong. I've got card dash body, card header. So I think my card header or my card body is where I went wrong. Card body. So card body. I don't know. That looks right. Maybe it doesn't matter too much. This is where I wish we were sort of in person. You could yell at me. What's the difference between what we're seeing there and what we're seeing there? Okay, I think I know what it is. I think I wanted this header to be above my body. I think. Let's find out. So now I have my my card. I have my header and then my body. Okay, so now if I look at my card, my header is sort of, it's up here and kind of styled. And then I've got my card body, and that starts to make sense to me. Okay, but what I just did was I looked at the documentation, and I sort of brought in the classes that I was seeing in the documentation into my own HTML, and I can go and customize it from there. So I'm going to maybe walk through like one more component, but the idea is the same, where what you're doing is you're looking for a component, you're reading through the code and you're reading through the examples and you're trying stuff out. So I don't know, I'm just going to go with like an accordion here because it's right at the top. So what even is an accordion? Okay, so here's the example. looks like an accordion is this sort of drop down menu where you can sort of click on each one and it sort of expands, and it's kind of animated, and it's got some styling that makes it look kind of nice. So maybe I will bring that in. So as your professor here, I probably shouldn't tell you to copy paste a bunch of code in, but let's be honest, that's what you're going to do. So, I don't blame you, but what I would say is like just make sure that you are understanding what you're copying. So I'm going to copy this whole thing actually, and just see what happens when I bring it into my project. So I'm going to go back here. I've got my card working, and sure, maybe I just want to have, now I want to have like a drop down. So I'm going to just paste that in, straight up paste it in. And it will work because I am already loading Bootstrap up here. So I've got my magic Bootstrap loading, and let me prettify this because it's getting pretty gross. One of the things that is kind of annoying about Bootstrap is you have a ton of classes and a ton of divs and stuff, but as long as you follow what they are trying to get you to do, you'll be okay. So let me kind of customize this now that I've pasted it in. So I've got, where's my accordion? So here's my accordion, and I'm going to leave the classes alone for the most part. So I can probably change the ID because I don't think Bootstrap is actually using that for anything, but the classes I'm going to leave alone, and some of these like data attributes, I think this is like how Bootstrap sort of connects everything. So I'm also going to leave those alone, but I can customize the text. So I can say like, I don't know, maybe I want like lions, and then in here, I want like, where's this? This is just a div. I want to say like, lions are the king of the jungle. I don't know, whatever. And that has customized that first drop down. So I've got lions. Lions are the king of the jungle. And I didn't plan any of this content ahead, so it's going to get goofy. But what I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm like looking for things I should change. So accordion item number 2, I'm going to change that. So that's currently like the text that shows here. And I'll say like bears, and then I'll change some of this. This is the content that shows, oh, my little face is going to be in the way. Let's move me over here-ish. Sure. Okay, now I'm over there. Okay. But what I'm doing is I'm changing the text here. So I'm going to say bears, I don't know, love to eat honey. Okay. And now I have lions, and I can sort of, oh, it's annoying. I'm going to, oh, I'm zoomed in, that's why. Okay, so the last thing I'll change is this accordion item number 3, and I'll say, I don't know, lions, oh, I forgot tigers, so let's do tiger. Lions, bears, and tigers, whatever. And then here I'll just say like, oh my, because this text doesn't actually matter. But now I have this example where my page contains, well, first off, it contains my card from before, but now it has this drop down, this accordion in it, and it works, right? I have lions, bears, and tigers. Oh my. And it is kind of a lot to take in at first. It's a lot of classes and a lot of like sort of connected pieces like that, but Bootstrap gives you most of that. Really, the only stuff I had to add was the actual text, and then the functionality that I get from Bootstrap, I get that mostly for free, or as a result of using these magic classes. So I can click through, and Bootstrap's JavaScript is providing this like interactivity, and Bootstrap's CSS is providing like all the styles that are happening, like the the blue background and whatnot. So I could go and read more about accordions. I just took the first example that they had, but let's say I wanted it to be, I don't know, to not have borders, and to sort of go like fill up the width of the parent container that it's in. Here's an example that does that. What if I wanted them to stay open when you clicked new ones? Here's how to do that. And the process of reading through the documentation, trying stuff out, and bringing it into your project, into your HTML, that's web development. That's our job. That's what we do. And you can then go and read more about many different kinds of components that Bootstrap gives you. So I don't know, for example, here's a carousel that shows sort of images or content in this like interactive, like almost like a slideshow, where you can show, I don't know, maybe like different pictures that animate. And here's how you do that. Here's the code for that. You would copy that into your project and change the little pieces that are where you add your content. And then here's more like, customization options. So if you wanted to have like this little progress indicator, you could. And it works. And here's the code for that. And so on and so forth. Like here's if you want to add text. Or I don't know, let's say you wanted, I don't know, like a tooltip. How would you do that? Well, here's the code for it. And here's an example. If I mouse over that, look at that like beautiful, like purple tooltip. Look how cool. And the code for it is, not all that complicated because most of the code for it is in Bootstrap's library, which you don't really have to look at if you don't want to. Okay, so those are a couple of components, but the idea would be the same of going through, clicking them and reading about them and copying some code in, fiddling around, and then, customizing it from there. I do want to specifically call out a couple of like specific components, and that is the layout components here. So I want to start with containers. So I used this sort of by default in my first example where I added a container div. And this is, pretty common practice. I don't know, maybe I should put my face back where it was. Let's see. Yee. Where I have this container. And why did I do that? And that is because Bootstrap offers this container class, which has a set of features that are pretty handy. And so to explain that, what's the best way to do this? Maybe what I'll do is I'll pop this out into its own window. Yeah. So this is just the same exact page that we've been working on, just kind of popped out into its own tab. So let me sort of have that here so I can sort of resize it. So I have this and I'm going to sort of resize it so I'll make it like, I don't know, really big. And so what will happen as I resize my window is my container, first off, sort of notice that my content is not like filling up the entire width of my screen, which is like sort of the default behavior in just normal HTML. If you have like really long text, it'll just take up the entire width of the screen, which ends up looking like not great. So Bootstrap gives you these like margins on each side, sort of centers the content in the middle, and then gives you margins on each side. And, you could write that CSS yourself, but of course you could write all of this CSS yourself. But the sort of interesting thing that Bootstrap gives you is as I resize my window, the container will sort of snap to predefined pixel widths. And so to show you what I mean, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to resize my window. So I'm getting smaller, 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 smaller. And see how the container sort of snapped to a smaller width, like the content of my page jumped to be, smaller, and that's to preserve those margins. If I get bigger, you can see that like as I go from like one threshold to another, it's either like kind of wider or kind of smaller, and it gets quite a bit smaller as I go. There is a limit, and let's see what happens when I reach that. And yeah, okay. So if I'm like really small, then it just takes up, the width I give it. But if I get a little wider, then it'll start that snapping behavior where it'll snap to a predefined pixel width. And if I keep going, it'll snap and snap and snap and snap. So why is that handy? That is handy because it means that you can now design your page to work for those specific widths. So you don't have to guess like exactly how tall or how wide is my user's screen going to be, because you don't know that ahead of time. Some people will be looking at your web page on a like tiny little phone. Some people will be looking at it on a super wide monitor and anywhere in between. And getting that to work is kind of annoying because you have to like think about like every combination of screen. And there are ways to do it. You can do it yourself with CSS, but why would you do that if you can use Bootstrap? So to read more about containers, you can read through the page on Bootstrap, and here are those pixel widths that snaps to. So if your screen is, or if your browser window is less than 576 pixels, then it just takes up the whole width. If your screen is less than 768, then your container will be 540, and so on and so forth, where these are the pixel values that you have to care about. So you can design your web page like, what should it look like at 540? And that's one thing that you should think about. What should it look like at 720? What should it look like at 960? And so on and so forth. And you don't really have to worry about that like out of the gate, really, but just know that that is a thing that Bootstrap provides. So generally, I would recommend like always at least having a container on the outside because it gives you some of that default behavior. But if you wanted to sort of take your layouts to the next level and like really take advantage of that feature that I just mentioned, you would then go to another layout component called grid. And this is actually a set of components that you use together to lay out your component. So this is pretty similar to like Flexbox or to Grid that you might see in like just native vanilla CSS, but it has a couple of concepts that are like unique to Bootstrap, and at first might take some adjustment, but once you start thinking in them in terms of like how they organize their page, it does become a little more natural. And so this idea is the idea of template columns, they're called. And let's see. So the way Bootstrap's layout system works is that it's a series of rows with columns in those rows. And so here's an example where, see, I've got a container, which is what we just looked at. And then inside of that, I've got a row. Okay. And then inside of that row, I have a column, and another column. And that will organize the content into, well, 3 columns. And that's a relatively small example, but it gets, more and more involved as you look at other sort of options. So let's see. So here's a way to like make one of the columns a little wider. And this is using that concept that I sort of just hinted at, which is the template columns. And so if I go sort of up a little bit, where was that example? Here. So Bootstrap by default splits its container or a row into 12 columns. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have literally 12 columns of content. What it means is you can say, hey, Bootstrap, since I know that the whole thing is 12 columns or 12 units, you can think of them in, I want this part to be 6 of those columns, this part to be 3 of those columns, this part to be 1, and so on and so forth, as long as it adds up to 12. And so here let's see, in this example, it's using that template column, which is just a class, and it's saying, give this div 6 of the columns. 6 of the 12. So this would take up roughly half of the page. And then the other ones, we don't really care. Just do whatever you want with those. And so if I look at the first row, then indeed, this one takes up roughly half of the total width. This takes up like 25%, this takes up 25%, and this takes up 50%. And you can get pretty granular with that. You can say this should take up 5, and this should take up 7, or this should take up 3, this one 6, this one 2, this one 1. Really depends on exactly what your content is. But this is really powerful. And the other sort of thing that makes this powerful is that it works with the snapping of the container, so that you can say for different sort of, snapping dimensions, different content should take up different amounts of columns. And so I put an example of this together because it's sort of just bit easier to like look at. So I added some styling just to make it stand out a little more, but really this is a row with some of those classes that we were talking about. So what this is saying is for this div here, for this content, this on medium screens should take up 8 columns. This one should by default take up 6 unless we are like above a certain threshold or below a certain threshold, then it should take up 4. And so on and so forth. And let me just kind of show you what this looks like if I open this in a new window and then sort of resize it. So by default, if I look here, you can sort of see that this is taking up 444. So because I'm over a certain threshold, I'm saying on medium screens or above, then this one should take up 4 columns, which means that they're just sort of in a row. They're horizontally aligned because 4, 4, 4, that adds up to 12. However, if I'm below that threshold, then this should take up 6. So what's going to happen as I resize it is these are going to go from being horizontal to being vertical. So let me just do that. So if I resize my window, my container is going to snap to a smaller width, and then my content is going to realign itself. And there it goes. So now, instead of this 444 being next to each other, it is now sort of vertical, like sort of stacked on top of each other. And you've probably seen this in your own sort of just being on the internet, where a website will look one way on a desktop and a different way on a phone. And maybe it's the same content, but just kind of rearranged. And this is how they do that. They might not be using Bootstrap. They might be using the same kinds of techniques that Bootstrap is using. But the idea is the same. And so this idea of the container and the grid working together to let you customize the layout on different screen sizes is really powerful. And again, you could do all of this by yourself. You could write CSS that does it. You're using something like a media query to change what it looks like, but you'd have to do a ton of work to figure out like, oh, exactly how wide should my screen be? Exactly when should I, change my layout? Bootstrap has done that for you, and that's kind of the power. So container and grid are a little confusing when you first see them. So if right now you're like, I didn't understand a single thing that he just said in the last 10 minutes, that's kind of okay. Because right now, I think the main goal is like, now you know that it is a thing and you can go learn more about it if you're interested, if you think that's useful to you. Okay, so that is containers and grids. Let me go back to this example to talk through just a few more things. So right now, this is just the default example that I've been working from, where I've added a few Bootstrap components to my page. And right now I'm using the styles that Bootstrap gave me. I don't think I have any styles in my CSS. And for the most part, that's okay. That's kind of the power of Bootstrap in the first place, right? Is that it gives you these default styles. However, you are not like locked into Bootstrap's defaults. So for example, let's say I wanted to, let's say I want to change, I want to change the color of this button. Or maybe that's a bad example because there are other ways to do that in Bootstrap. If I go to, Bootstrap's button page, then, I have different colors that I can choose from, the danger color, that's fun. So maybe I won't use that as an example. Maybe I'll just change, the title, the color of my card. How would I do that? Well, sometimes you can go through Bootstrap to do it, but you can also just add your own styles. So here, card header, right now is being styled by Bootstrap. So it's giving it, a certain font. It's giving it this like gray background. It's giving it this like, this border at the bottom. It's, making it look like this. But I want all of that, except I want it to be red. How would I do that? Well, I would do exactly what we've been doing the entire time. I would write some CSS that selects this class and then styles it. So let's do that. So I go to styles.css. I'm going to say dot card dash header and then some curly braces. And then I'm going to say, color red. And there it is. Now it's red. And the, I don't know, important thing is that it also still has all of the styles that came from Bootstrap. It still has that gray background. It still has that, line underneath it, that border bottom. And it also is red. And this is part of the cascading part of CSS, cascading style sheets. Cascading means that I can combine the styles from Bootstrap with my own custom styles, and they sort of cascade together to produce this end result where this element now has styles from Bootstrap and from my own custom CSS. And you can do that with any of the Bootstrap classes. I could also add my own classes if I wanted to. So I could say like class, also, I don't know, like my red text. And I would sort of style this class, which is not a Bootstrap class. It's just my own. So you can also do it that way. Okay, so that is one way to customize Bootstrap styling, and you could do that. You could do that for every single one of these classes, and any other class that you find in the Bootstrap documentation. However, if you wanted to make sort of a broader change, like let's say you wanted to, come up with like a dark theme. So you wanted all of your elements to be a little darker, maybe with like lighter text, that kind of thing. Going through and writing custom CSS for every single Bootstrap component or every single Bootstrap class, that would be very annoying. And wouldn't it be nice if someone did that for you, right? Well, you can probably guess that someone has. And these are referred to as Bootstrap themes. And really, all a Bootstrap theme is a CSS file that contains some alternative classes or some alternative styles for the classes that Bootstrap uses. So I don't know, let's say I just typed in Bootstrap themes. And sure, this first example, this first page is the official Bootstrap page. This is on Get Bootstrap. So you can see that these are the themes, like official Bootstrap themes, but they cost kind of a lot of money, especially because in the end, they are CSS files. I think people should be paid for their work. And I think this is actually how Bootstrap makes a bit of their money by providing these custom themes. But if you're just learning, then I don't pay $50 for a CSS file. Instead, there are free websites that are all based on like, here's some free themes for Bootstrap. So Bootswatch is a really good one. So check that out. And if I scroll down here are a bunch of themes for Bootstrap, and you can kind of pick and choose. You can preview them. So I don't know, what's this one look like? And here's what a themed version of all of the Bootstrap components are. So I don't know, does it have like a card in here somewhere? Yeah, here's some cards that we've been looking at. Here's what that would look like. Here's an accordion, which is another example we saw where I can click around and it's just kind of different, but it's still the same underlying sort of component, same underlying CSS, or same classes at least, but just different styles for those classes. So you can pick one that's your favorite. You can find a bunch. I'm going to use Cyborg as my example here. So to use a theme, what I need to do is get the CSS file, and there are a few ways to do that. I think for most like real projects, you would probably download it and then upload it to your project and sort of host it yourself. You could do that by uploading it to Glitch. The other way that I'm going to do it here is I'm going to click this dropdown, and I can pick one, bootstrap.css or bootstrap.min.css, and I'm going to right click it, and I'm going to, I don't know, there's a couple ways I can do it, but copy link, or if you open in a new tab, then that gives you the whole thing. But really, you just want the URL. I want the URL here, which is going to end in a .css. So I'm going to copy that in, and I'm going to go back to my project, and I am going to, I guess I'll keep in my red text here. But the thing I'm going to change is this line of code where I'm loading the Bootstrap CSS instead of loading it from the default official Bootstrap site. I'm going to paste in the URL that I just copied. So if I paste that in, ta-da, now it is sort of this dark theme. And I'm still customizing it with my red text, so you can mix and match themes and your custom styling. I still have that here. Maybe I'll get rid of that just to show you what it looks like without it. But the idea is that none of my HTML changed. None of my classes in my HTML changed. The only thing that changed is where I was loading the CSS file for Bootstrap from. That's the only thing that changed. And because this new file defines different styles for those Bootstrap classes, it looks different, looks quite a bit different actually. So now I've got this like dark theme, and now my dumb face is in the way. So if I click around, I can sort of explore what that looks like. So that is the idea of using themes in Bootstrap, which are really just alternative CSS files for Bootstrap. Okay, so from here, let's see. So I'm going to change that back to not, no, whoops, I went too far. There. Just to like the light font. I'm going to bring myself back. Whee! Okay. So to sort of summarize, Bootstrap is a library. It's like a JavaScript and CSS library, which really just means that it's a CSS file and a JavaScript file. And as long as you use the classes that that library also uses, then you can take advantage of the styling and sort of interactivity that the JavaScript gives you. And to figure out how to use those classes or what classes are even available to you, you should go to the Bootstrap documentation and read through all of these components. So one that I meant to call out earlier that I honestly forgot to is navbar. So navbar is a super popular thing, and this is like the thing at the top. It's like this guy up here where it's got docs, examples, icons, all that good stuff. These are relatively annoying to code yourself, and so you can use Bootstrap's navbar. And it's kind of a lot of classes to get something. Well, this is a pretty complicated example actually, but you've got a navbar, like sort of, I don't know, like homepage link, and then a bunch of links. This one even has a drop down with some other stuff you can do. This search, like, don't get too excited. It's not like this automatically works. Like, you would need to implement search yourself, but you can have different elements in your navbar. Or I don't know, here's like a simpler example where it's, let's see, where's a better example? Yeah, here's maybe a simpler example where you've just got a bunch of different things, and maybe some of them have like different colors to call out different kinds of behavior. And so this is just one component that Bootstrap gives you. But the idea is you find a component that's interesting, that like solves a problem for you, and you read about it, you figure out how it works, and then you bring that into your project, and you get it working, and then you like look for ways to customize it further by reading through the documentation. And that is Bootstrap. So the last thing I want to maybe talk through is, I don't know, we'll see how this goes, but it's a little more, I don't know, philosophical. And that is the trade-off, I think, that Bootstrap offers. And that is, Bootstrap gives you a lot. So it gives you all of these components. It gives you some, like, I don't know, professional looking default styling for the components that it offers you. And it, I don't know, it lets you like get started. That's kind of like why it's named that, Bootstrap, because you're like, bootstrapping your web page. And it helps you sort of quickly iterate and say like, oh, I want a navbar. Well, boom, copy paste, there's your navbar. And that's good. That it does offer that quite a bit. That is a real benefit. However, the trade-off that you're making is now you are coding in Bootstrap. You're still writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but you are sort of going through Bootstrap. And so you have to think in Bootstrap. You have to think in components. You have to think in like containers and grids and rows. And that can be a little bit of, I don't know, sort of extra burden while you're coding. because you have to now know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you also have to know Bootstrap. And there's a lot of going back and forth between all of those. And the other, I don't know, sort of even more philosophical aspect of this is many websites use Bootstrap. And it gets to a point where you can kind of see them. You'll start to notice them after you code in Bootstrap for a little bit. You'll like just be, on the internet and you'll be like, oh, wait, this looks familiar. Like, oh, there's little rounded buttons. Oh, that little card. That's a Bootstrap card, I can tell. And it leads to, like, I don't know, less diversity, I think, on the internet. And there are pros and cons to that, I think, but it is a trade-off that you should think about. Do you want your web page to look like every other web page, or do you want it to be a little more custom and built from scratch? The other thing I'll mention is I think Bootstrap was created back when CSS was still like, pretty annoying to work with. But since then, things like Flexbox and some of the newer CSS features have really caught up to some of these libraries like Bootstrap. So in the end, it's up to you. I truly want to leave it up to you. I'm not saying that one is better or worse, but there is a trade-off between using something like Bootstrap and coding it yourself. However, the reason that I include Bootstrap in these series, in this class, in these videos, is less about Bootstrap and more about the idea of using these libraries. So Bootstrap is one example. There are many. So another example is Tailwind. So Tailwind is pretty similar to Bootstrap in a lot of ways, where it's basically just a CSS file or a JavaScript file and a CSS file, and it provides a bunch of classes that you can use. Tailwind is a little like more granular than Bootstrap, but really it's a bunch of classes where if you use the Tailwind classes, then Tailwind provides a bunch of styles for you that you don't have to really think about too much yourself. But the idea is the same, where you are using the, like, I don't know, content or features from a library, or you might call it a framework, and you're sort of using those in your project instead of coding it yourself. And that is a very common idea. Like another example is React. React is another really popular framework, and this is more for like, I don't know, sort of state-driven web apps where you are working with a lot of data. But the idea is the same, where you are no longer coding the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript entirely on your own. You are going through a library. And again, it's just pros and cons. But this is a really popular idea. So if you continue in your web development journey, then you will encounter other frameworks, other libraries. And now that you've seen Bootstrap, which is one of them, a lot of the ideas are going to be the same. So that is sort of why I still include Bootstrap in this series, even though, I don't personally really use it much anymore. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Hopefully this gives you, I don't know, hopefully right now you're like, yeah, shut up, dude. I want to go like look at all the components that I could include in my web page. And that is the power of Bootstrap. I do remember, like, I'm kind of giving it a hard time right now, but when I first learned it, it was a bit of like a whoa moment for me, because you can easily get stuff like up and running pretty quickly that looks like pretty professional without worrying about it yourself. So anyway, go explore Bootstrap, have fun with it, and I'll see you in the next one. And until then, happy coding.